Alright folks, so in this video I'm just going to talk about some very basic modeling stuff. I'm going to create a little chest or something, like a Minecraft chest, imagine. Cool. Alright, so to do that I'm going to start by making a cube. So again, you can do that by going to the poly modeling shelf and just hitting the cube button, right? That's a cube. But a thing in Maya is that you can do things multiple ways. Most things have like a bunch of different ways to do them. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do this in case you have a preference. You could also go to create polygon primitives cube. Okay, same thing, right? Same result, cube. The last way, if you hold shift, you hit right click, and this brings up a little menu that makes it pretty fast. You can just hit cube. Cool. All right, so we have a cube. First thing I'm going to do, so remember I was talking about the grid in the last video. This right now is intersecting the grid. By default, that's how everything's going to work. But we want this, especially when we import it into Substance Painter in Unity, we want to make sure that it's on the level ground. To do this, Maya makes it fairly easy. Maya is a little different, so if you're familiar with things like Blender, it does this a little differently than some of these other 3D programs. Maya really puts a lot of focus on what's called the pivot point of an object. So if we look at this object here, and I go into the movement tool, we can see right now the pivot point of the object is in the center. What that means is we can see this where the widget sort of pops up. That's right in the center of the object. If you hit D, so the letter D, while you're in the movement tool, you can move the pivot point of the object. Why this is important is because the pivot point determines how you snap objects to other things. That's one of the main things. So if I press D, sorry, I keep hitting the Windows key. If I press D while I'm doing this, while I'm in the movement tool, I can move the pivot point. So there's going to be a lot of letters, so follow with me. I pressed D. Well, first I clicked the object, I pressed W to go into the movement mode. Then I pressed the letter D. That brings me into the moving the pivot point mode. And then I'm going to hold V, so you can think of this as vertex, because this is snapping to vertices. I'm going to hold V, and what that does is makes the pivot point snap to specific spots when I move it. So what I'm going to do here is just on the y-axis, while holding V, I'm going to move the pivot point down to the bottom of the object. So I'm just going to go through that one more time. Let me just undo all that. Okay, so the pivot point by default is right here. If I hold, I just press D, that puts me in pivot point movement mode. I hold V, and then I take this vertical widget right here, so just moving on the y-axis, and I just move my mouse down a little bit while click and dragging that. Now the pivot point's down there. Why did I want to do that? That's because now the object will snap using that pivot point. So how you snap objects to the grid in Maya is by holding the X key. So now that the pivot point's down here, I'm going to hold X. I'm going to take this vertical one. So this whole time I've just been moving it vertically, right? So I don't want it to move from the center of the grid. I just want it to be just on top of the grid. So I'm going to hold X. I'm going to move it up. And now we can see it snaps. The pivot point snaps directly to the grid. So now, if we look at the object, look at it. It's nice. It snaps directly to the grid. If we go into the 4-up mode, so before I talked about this in the interface video, if you press this button right here, it'll bring you into a mode where you can see all the different sides of the thing. You can also enter that mode by just pressing space. Okay, anyway, while I'm in this mode, and then if you hover over one of these, you can like enter that mode and make that mode big. So if I hover over the front view here, press space, I can see this thing is directly on the grid, right? It's no longer straddling this like cross section. It's directly on there. That's exactly what we wanted. Okay, cool. So now, so that's definitely going to be a habit you'll want to get into, is just like when you create objects, make sure that they are right there. On there, that process there. Okay, so now that it's here, I'm going to talk about how we might turn this thing into a very simple chest. Excuse me. So if we look at it, right now it's just a box, right? There's not enough geometry to make a lid. So sorry, what I'm trying to do is put a lid on this box. There's not enough geometry, right? I can move all these edges and vertices all I want. It's not going to make a lid. So what I need to do is add some more vertices to the object. A good tool to do that, so remember I'm in the modeling standard mode, so that brings up the modeling toolkit over here. Okay, so this brings up a bunch of different tools right here. I'm going to use a tool called the multi-cut that we're going to use a lot in this class. I'm going to hit the multi-cut button right here, just click it. Okay, and what that does is allows me to cut new lines and edges into the surface of an object. So for example, I could do this. So I've now divided this into two tries, right, by adding a new edge here. That's not what I'm trying to do in this, so I'm going to undo that. A really cool part of the multi-cut tool is that you can use it to add edge loops. So if you have the multi-cut tool and you hold Control or Command, if you're on Mac, we can see that instead of just like drawing one line, it automatically creates this edge loop. An edge loop is an edge, a series of edges that go all around the surface of an object. So if I'm just going to hold Control while I'm using the multi-cut tool, I'm going to pick a good spot, probably like here is probably pretty good. Okay, so now we have, it kind of look, well now it really looks like a Minecraft chest, but that's, we're going to take it a little step further. Right, so we have the beginnings of what could be a lid here, but it's still flush to the surface of the geometry. So if I turn off the wireframe or anything, this thing is it's still just a cube. It just happens to have a line on it. So let's make it actually have a lid. To do that, I'm gonna select faces. Okay, so remember that you can select different parts of objects by holding right-click while over an object and then selecting which kind of thing you want to select. So I'm going to drag down to face. I want to select faces. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these four faces, the edges here. So to select multiple ones, I click, oh, well, I've accidentally selected that one. I click that one, and then I hold Shift while I click the other ones. So now I have all four. Okay, cool. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a tool called the Extrude tool. You can find that in the modeling shelf right here, the one that kind of looks like a building or something. If I do that, the shortcut for that is also Control E or Command E, if you would prefer. All right, cool. So now I can what extruding does is takes faces or edges and like creates a new one, and you can move it out. So it basically, like, look at the icon, right? Imagine you had like a little thing, and you can like pull like a building out of the ground, that sort of thing. I think it'll be easier if I just show you. To do that, you can use any of these little values. So this thing pops up when you use a lot of these tools. I'm going to go through each of these. There's thickness. So you can set values directly in here. So if I just set the thickness to 1, okay, so that's that's obviously huge. That looks like a vial plume or something. But you can adjust any of these values if you just hover over the text and click and drag left to right. You can do it like contextually. All right, so that seems pretty good. Just 0.1. Well, actually, I want to stay in the tool. Okay, cool. So yeah, that looks pretty good. Now we have kind of a lid on there. But you can also adjust different values. In this case, the local translate Z is the same as the thickness, basically. The offset allows us to change the size of the faces that we're extruding. So in this case, we look at this. Now the lid kind of has like a kind of jewel type look to it or something. So I'm going to leave that as standard. Divisions allows us to add more geometry. So basically, when we pull out, now we can see I just added a bunch of new faces here. Each of those divisions is basically how many new edges we add. And then finally, there's a nice toggle here for keep faces together. In this case, we want it on. I'll show you why. If we have it off, it does not force the extruded faces to keep touching. So in this case, each of the faces pulls out independently, and we wind up with, I don't know, this really looks like a mushroom or something. Not quite the lid look we want. Okay, any of these tools to finish, like to confirm that you're done with them, if you hit Enter, well, I think you should hit Q. Sorry, it's actually Q. If you hit Q, that'll bring you back to the Select tool, and it'll confirm what you did. All right, so now we have a box. I'm going to talk about one more thing in this video, and that is the heads-up display. I currently don't have it on, but this is something that's super useful, especially for game work. So if we go to Display at the top menu, so remember that's Display, go to Heads-up Display. There's a bunch of different options, but I'm going to talk about specifically the poly count one. So you go to display, heads up display, poly count. If you click that, what it does is create this little thing here. There's a little menu where it says your verts, your edges, your faces, and this is a count of all of those things in your scene. So you can think about like game assets, especially 3D sculpted ones, wind up with like millions of polygons, and they can be not quite optimized. The more polygons you have, the harder it is for the computer to render that object. So this is a good thing to keep your eye on. It's just like, oh wow, I'm winding up with a lot of polygons. So we look at this. It shows you how many verts, how many edges, how many faces, tries, and then we're not talking about UVs yet, but that's another thing. The second column is how many are currently visible in your viewport. So if I like, sorry, that's not. How many things are visible in like the layer you're on. Right now, everything's visible. And then the final thing is how many you've selected. So that can be useful because sometimes you wind up with like faces and edges and vertices on top of each other, and you think you've only selected one thing. So we can see I've selected one vertex here. But sometimes you'll be like, oh wow, for some reason I've selected two vertices. I thought there was only one there, and that can lead to problems into your geometry. So that's another reason this is useful. I would definitely always have this on. I know I set a bad example by not having it on at the beginning of the video, but here we go. So again, to do that, display, heads up display, poly count. Okay, cool. I will see you all in the next video.